Picture, I chose it. It's like from a couple of years ago, and we had Wed, Dima, and Rua there. And with this, I think it was just interesting because everyone kind of talks about cardio. They need to do cardio. A lot of the time, it comes from like a fat loss perspective. Like, I need to do cardio to lose fat. We want to get into that a little bit today. But for this event in particular, this was one of the first ones really that they hosted on the Corniche here in Jeddah. And it was a personal challenge that these ladies wanted to do. You know, it was their first sort of 5K that they kind of worked towards, and was quite a nice performance lens for them to get into. So with this, we'll get into it, and we will cover questions as we go through the session too. So if anyone has any questions, obviously myself and Marvin are here, so we can obviously answer them as we talk through, or in the chat box. So please do share any thoughts, comments, questions that may come up, because we know cardio is quite a big topic, and there's probably all sorts of perceptions, misconceptions, myths, all of these sorts of things that hopefully we can answer today. But generally, what we'll cover is obviously what is cardio, right? In order to talk about it, we need to be on the same page. So we'll share what the definition is, why it's overestimated of sorts for fat loss, what really drives sustainable fat loss, and also the biggest mistakes people can make when relying on cardio, and what then the smart approach to fat loss is, right? We want to leave you with clear, actionable points that you can really go and implement right away, at all. So yeah, I think sort of I'll kick off here, and myself and Marvin, I'm sure there's probably a few more you can add in terms of what we have heard from clients, whether we've been training them in person or sort of online, and a lot of it, and probably they're kind of not necessarily new to you, right? People think they need to just lose a load of fat first by doing cardio before starting weights. You hear things around the sort of optimal fat burning zone. People doing endless hours of cardio in the gym and not losing fat. Doing cardio specifically to lose certain areas of body fat. The whole kind of sweating more to burn fat, fasted cardio, and like just thinking about calories and how many calories they are burning in a particular exercise. So we're kind of going to delve into all of these sorts of comments and thinking as we go through. And again, if there's any questions that come up, just shout. But Marvin, do you want to take the reins here?
Sure thing. So first sort of question really is, what is cardio, right? We want to define what we're talking about. And the word cardio in itself comes from cardiovascular training, so training of the heart, right? Anything that challenges and improves your heart, lungs, your circulatory system's ability to deliver oxygen to your muscles over time. So essentially, it's a tool to build your engine, right? And over here on the right side of your screen, we have the different zones, right? So this is based on your heart rate. And so zone one, is sort of 50% of your max heart rate. Zone two, three, four, five, kind of going up. And how we like to kind of use these zones is as a way to gauge the intensity that you are using in your sort of cardio training. And yeah, these are really good to kind of have an awareness of. Pete, have you ever heard that analogy of different zones being how you talk being able to be the way that you gauge what zone you're in? So, for
For
example, if
sure.
I'm talking like this, right, I'm not even in zone one, right? My heart rate is not even at 50% of my max. But if I kind of start talking like that, right, I'm getting into zone one, two, three, and by five, I can barely get a word in, right?
Yeah, and I think it's always a sort of, oh, we got someone else, Tahani, joining as well. It's always a good measure, right? Because if you are, perform, it's kind of the same when it goes to weights in a way, right? When you're weight training, if you're kind of going through your set, you're on your phone, you're chatting to your friend, you can think, you can talk, and it's no problem. Arguably, you're not pushing hard enough, right? And so, cardio is slightly different in that you can still train the muscles and benefit from, performing cardio in different heart rate zones. So don't worry too much about what these numbers are. because we're going to get into that, the different types of cardio and sort of how you can think about those as you obviously may sort of implement them within your training.
So we have these two types essentially that we're going to go back and forth with. You could get even deeper into the science and so on, but we'll keep it very simple, right? So over here we have aerobic cardio. So essentially where you have oxygen present. So anything that is cyclical, rhythmic, continuous activity. So think walking, being on a bike. You're essentially doing the same motion countless times, right? Lower to moderate intensity, you can sustain long efforts, right, continuously, and your body is able to use oxygen more efficiently. And, like I was kind of explaining earlier, you can kind of hold the conversation. So slight pauses in between, your conversation. So we're at about 50 to 80% of your max heart rate when we're doing this. So Pete, when you did your half marathon, you were probably, for the
Zone
most part,
five the whole way through,
for the
beasting
most,
it the whole
what
way
you
through.
would be dead if you were in zone 5 the whole time.
I
Like
was
you wouldn't be
afterwards.
alive today.
But yeah, so I think like as Marvin said earlier, like it's all around, or you can think about it how you're able to talk during, right? Aerobic cardio is something that, as Marvin said, is like sustainable for long periods of time. And a lot of the time, people see it as like the boring type of cardio. Because who wants to sit on a Stairmaster for 60 minutes just plugging away, right? Or on a treadmill walking for 60 minutes? It's kind of boring. And there's a lot of like hype and glam and excitement over the next type, which is anaerobic, right? So without oxygen. I'm not sure if you remember these terms from your high school biology classes, but basically anaerobic cardio is without oxygen. And this is like the explosive, the high intensity, you kind of repeat the efforts as in like you go and then you rest and then you go and then you rest. So think about sprints, right? The difference between all out sprint, right? You can only do that for like 10, 15 seconds before like your energy is gone. Intervals, battle ropes, box jumps, these sorts of things that require like immediate energy. And what they do is they kind of you perform them, or you can perform them based on the stored energy within your muscle, right? Because your body can't get enough energy or kind of go through the sort of respiration cycle using oxygen, because literally if you're sprinting, you're barely breathing, right? You're just kind of go, 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 and then you collapse. Whereas aerobic is without oxygen. So this is the steadier, like sustainable efforts for long periods of time, often quite boring, and it doesn't have the sexy hype that, the anaerobic, beasting, high intensity type stuff does. We'll get into this later on, but ultimately there's time and a place for both. And if we're talking more about, improving sort of the cardiovascular system, the majority of which is really, correct me if I'm wrong, Marvin, going to come from the more kind of aerobic stuff, the things that you can sustain for long periods of time, because you can do it more often versus this, like the like beast mode stuff, is going to wipe you out and going to add a lot of stress to the system, right? And if we think about fat loss, when you are in a calorie deficit and you're reducing your calories and you're already not getting enough fuel in, maybe you're sleeping badly and everything else, adding things like this in is going to then just add kind of, fuel to the fire in terms of killing your recovery.
Yeah, and this is like interesting how if you were to kind of contrast it with strength training, right? Um, not many people are doing 1 rep, 2 rep, 3 rep, right? Because it's very taxing on the body. There's value in doing it, but it's not something you do often. Therefore, the same sort of notion would be applied to your cardiovascular training in terms of intensity. Now, speaking of the benefits of cardiovascular training, you're increasing the size, the strength, the volume of the heart, which allows for greater density and diameter of the vascular system. All these things that are responsible for making sure that the blood gets, it's pumped from the blood going to the, muscles, to the rest of your body, so that you can use it, right? You can get oxygen, you can get nutrients. You are able to then clear out waste that comes, as a result of training in your body, all the buildup, that burning sensation that you sometimes feel, when you're going through, your last rep of your bench press or your split squat, definitely split squat. When you have a bigger aerobic base, right? When you have much more of a good base of cardiovascular capacity, you are able to then clear out that waste, that lactic acid that builds up very quickly, which means you can recover and then go and do the sets sooner than you would if you weren't as fit, if you didn't have as big of an aerobic base, right? It lowers your resting blood pressure, your heart rate, and then balances between your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, right? So your fight or flight or your rest and digest, right? So when you are fight or flight and like, stressed, panicking, all these things versus when you're resting, digesting, when you are much fitter, you're able to balance those two and you're not always in fight or flight. And then we have the
Yeah,
last
and
one here,
of course, sorry, Karen.
on the mitochondrial quantity. So essentially the part of your cells that produces energy. And so if you are fitter, if you have a good aerobic base, and if you have good cardiovascular capacity, it means that these cells are able to produce energy in a much more efficient way. So this is the science, kind of delving a little bit deeper into the science. Pete, you
Yeah,
wanted
so
to add something there?
yeah, I think it's just around, think of your cardiovascular system as the engine, right? As we said it before, like the muscles are kind of like the tools. If you have a strong engine in terms of it's efficient, it acts as a very good baseline for everything else that you want to do, right? You'll probably find it, whether you're walking upstairs, whether you are kind of doing your reps in the gym, whether you're kind of randomly going on a hike or whatever it might be, carrying your shopping in, right? If you are generally fitter and have a stronger cardiovascular system, then you are going to be able to do all of these things with much less effort and stress, right? Because you're like, for example, that first point, right? If the heart is strong, right, with every beat, it can pump around more oxygen in the body, more blood in the body, and therefore more oxygen in the body. And so it becomes much more efficient. Whereas if your heart isn't trained, and the heart is a muscle, right? If it's not trained, then it's weak and it's going to sort of have to pump a lot faster to get the same amount of volume through. So much like we need to train our muscles, there's an element of needing to train the heart as well.
And then the real driver for fat loss. It's interesting how notice how we've spoken about the benefits of cardio, and not in one part do we mention anything about fat loss. So which means, cardiovascular training is not essentially, the key to fat loss, right? The real driver for fat loss is surprise, a calorie deficit. And I'll let Pete touch on, what that entails.
Yeah, so don't be scared by this slide. This is something we made earlier in a previous presentation. But in order to understand what a calorie deficit is, right, you need to understand how the body burns calories, how the body burns energy, right? And so don't be afraid by the terms and everything. We'll go through it very, very sort of simply. So you've got your BMR, which is your basal metabolic rate. And the way I want you to think about this is essentially it's just like the calories at rest. If you were to sit in front of Netflix all day, your body would burn just a certain amount of energy just from existing, right? Your digestive system, fueling the brain, your immune system, like all of these things, right? Breathing, this kind of stuff. Your body is going to burn a base level of calories a day. So, for example, here, it may be 1400, right? It's the biggest chunk of what you're going to burn in the day. Now, when you consume food as well, there is this thing called the thermic effect of food. And food just doesn't get broken down, right? It requires energy to be broken down. And so, for example, protein, one of the ingredients we tell you to eat a lot of, actually requires more energy to be broken down. And therefore, there's calories expended in the food breakdown process. Now, the thing called NEAT is this non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So this is the calories required to perform daily movement, right? Getting up and down from the sofa, getting out of bed, going down the stairs to your car, lifting up your phone, like all these sorts of things, right? These small, like muscular contractions throughout the day are going to burn calories, right? You need energy to do them. And really, when it comes to fat loss, this is the biggest area, the biggest potential that we can impact. So this is why Marvin, I swear he's got an affiliate code for the walking pad. Uh, but
I wish.
just you're satisfied knowing that you're helping people achieve more steps. But yeah, so like steps, this is why we use steps as a really good measure, right? Because we can say if you're moving 7,000 steps a day, then okay, that's a certain level of energy. If we now need to create more of a calorie deficit, we can say, okay, 8,000 steps, and you're going to burn more calories that way. So again, like steps isn't sexy, but it is such a driver. And then we have the exercise activity thermogenesis. So this is your training sessions. This is your high intensity. This is your, cardio. This is the stuff that requires effort, right? Significant effort in your training. And overall, this really doesn't burn much in the grand scheme of things, right? It's actually going to be the smallest sort of expenditure of calories within the day. And so to aim to increase this through either more training sessions or through cardio is going to be a bit of a lost cause because there is only a certain amount of time you can train a day, right? And probably ideally it's going to be an hour, maybe an hour and a half at a push. You can't add on more like another hour of cardio because your body's going to be wrecked. And so again, doing cardio to focus on increasing calorie burn is kind of futile, and there's a few reasons for that. So just to recap, the biggest area to burn more calories in your day is literally your movement. And when the average in Saudi Arabia is about 3,000 steps a day, it's no wonder that it's so easy, along with the convenience of food, to put on more weight, right? Because this is so small. And so if we look about it on this next slide, right, the calorie deficit is ultimately the food you take in has to be less than the energy that you burn because you have to make up the shortfall. Your body has to make up the shortfall or the deficit of calories, right? And so instead of getting energy from nowhere, it has to break down the body fat, which is ultimately, what we want. We want to break down the body fat for fuel. And an important thing here is if you are not strength training, then you're not signaling to the body to keep the muscle. And so because muscle is very energy demanding, the body, if you are in a calorie deficit, will break down the muscle, right? Which we don't want. We want it to break down the body fat. And so strength training keeps the muscle. You may even grow muscle during your training. But the calorie deficit is where the fat is lost, essentially. Now, you probably have enough of me talking, so I'm going to pass over to Marvin. Well, first of
Interestingly,
all, does that make sense? Like, are there any questions in relation to that? I know we've covered this before, but there's a few new clients we've got in here, and so it's always good to act as a reminder as to what are the big drivers. So we'll let some questions pop in if there are any. If not, I'll let Marvin. You can crack on.
yeah, so why do we think cardio is for fat loss? Like, why is this a notion that has been touted for the longest time, right? And there are various reasons. One of them being this illusion of sweat giving success, right? Whenever you sweat, you feel like you're doing something. People feel like they've worked harder when they're out of breath. Just this notion of, oh, I'm sweating, therefore I must be working. Well, technically, yes, your body is working really hard to cool you down, but your sweat isn't what's that? I've heard the phrase before of like
Is
sweat
fat
is fat
crying?
crying or leaving your body or something like that. Definitely not. It's an absolute myth, right? Sweat is the way of your body trying to cool you down so that you can actually function properly, right? So if sweat was what made me lose fat, I could just stand outside in the middle of summer in Jeddah, right? It's as simple as that. But I don't think there are many people that would be would be willing to do that. I don't think it also helps that we have cardio machines that have the amount of calories that you've burned on the screen, and fitness trackers, Apple Watches, Garmin's, Whoops, all these things also have gamified this whole process of, calories burnt and how much activity you've done. So all of this, adds to this idea that cardio, and the more you burn, the more you do, the more fat you're going to lose, right?
Yeah, and like I mean, just on this, like when you are sweating and you're putting in a good workout, it feels good, right? But it should not be a signal that you're losing fat. Again, like steps is going to be the best way to lose fat, and technically, fat leaving the body, I think they say, Marvin, is literally in your breath, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you literally breathe out your fat because obviously through the fat breakdown process, it goes that way, and then it's exhaled basically. And yeah, like I think it's quite fun when you've got your Apple Watch telling you how many calories you've burned, or maybe your MyFitnessPal, how much extra food you can have. But these are kind of dud measures in a way, and we'll get onto that a little bit later. So if you do have an Apple Watch, or you do have a Whoop, or you have something like that, the best way to look at it is kind of like it's a measure you can compare each time. So don't think of it as calories. Think of it as like, I don't know, like effort points or something. It's the amount of effort you put into that particular workout.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily need to ignore it, because I've got my Apple Watch and I've got my Whoop, but I'm not factoring that in as, okay, now I can eat more because of that.
Yeah, it's like you can use it as a metric of intensity, right? And I hate to be
Exactly.
the Debbie Downer, but these, it's a net positive, right? That we live in the 21st century with all these fitness trackers that help us become healthier, become fitter, become more consistent. It's great. However, these are companies that need to make money. And so how do they make money? They've figured out that if they gamify this process, they will make money at the end of the day, right? It's about what works, what makes them make more money, what makes them I don't think someone at Apple's thinking, oh, we want to make the world the healthiest place, and it's more about the money. The rise of group fitness classes is also another reason why, this myth of cardio being the main driver of fat loss, right? You've got the aerobics. When back in the day we had Insanity with Shaun T. I never followed it, but I know a lot of people that did. Nowadays we've got the Barrys, we've got the F45, we have the Soul Cycles. We have all these like hype classes like Pete was talking about earlier. I mean, there's even one called Orange Theory where they use heart rate monitors. I don't know if anyone's ever tried this one.
Yeah,
And
there's
then
one
heart rate
here.
monitor, right? And then you get this heart rate monitor. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think this is kind of how it works. You have heart rate monitors, and there's a screen on a TV in front of you as you're doing the class. Dark room, kind of looking like a club to mimic that vibe of like and so then you can see like what zone you're in, like we did in the slide in the beginning. And they deem zone 2, 3, 4 to be like the fat burning zone. So the more you stay in the fat burning zone, the more calories you burn, therefore the more fat loss you have, therefore the more successful you are. All of that is an absolute gimmick. And so again, it's that like the illusion of success through all these metrics and all these things that they can lure you to try and get into so that you can do more of it, right? You keep showing up to those things. Again, maybe a net positive because people are actually training and moving their bodies. But is that the driver of fat loss? Absolutely not. We know that we know that eating in a calorie deficit, like eating less food than your body is expending, is what's going to give us a calorie deficit. And then we also have, the earn your food mentality, which, we've all fallen prey to at some point, right? So, you hear the term, I ate poorly, I need to burn it off. I worked out, so I earned that pizza or that burger. So food companies have also started to get into this marketing play. And they display food, the calorie content in food. I've even seen, I don't know if anyone's seen some of these restaurants are starting to include how many calories you need to burn to eat X food. So they'll say, or like the minutes that you need to do. So for example, there'll be like a little person walking, and then it says, 300 minutes. So if you eat this food, it'll take you 300 minutes to burn off. I don't think that's the most like
But
positive thing to be
even
showing.
that's on the InBody assessments, right? It's like if
Yeah.
you do this exercise, you burn 100 calories an hour. If you do paddle, you do this, and so on. And
Yeah.
again, it's
Such
just a
arbitrary metrics,
it's
right?
a
Like
dud
they're not
steer.
even, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely arbitrary. So all these things have contributed to, the rise of seeing or thinking that cardio is, really for fat loss. And then when we think about the problem with relying on cardio for fat loss, it's really interesting that there's this certain expectation that we have, but then there's reality. So we've already spoken about fitness trackers that tell you you burn 500 calories doing, your, 1 hour run. But in reality, these fitness trackers are very, very, very inaccurate, right? So even if they were accurate, they still wouldn't be the driver for fat loss, but they're inaccurate, right? 25 to 90%, right? Some of the studies are actually showing that they're inaccurate by 25 to 90%. So when you burnt 500 calories, it could have been only 100. It could have also been, way more. So you don't really know.
And for me, Marvin, like just on, I'm one of those people who have like a strap on each wrist. So call me what you will. An Apple Watch and a Whoop. And I mean, I think probably generally like people are familiar with this now, but like the Whoop literally overestimates the steps by 20%,
There
right?
you go.
And so, I've got the Apple Watch telling me one thing, and I literally put them on at the same time. I've got the Whoop on the other. And so again, it's like you can't like sort of lull yourself into that sort of misperception, right? It's kind of use these tools for what they're good for, right? Whether that's heart rate, whether that is kind of HRV, whether that is all these sorts of things, but know where they aren't the most accurate.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other one is, I can run off or I can do the 5K run and that'll help me get into a deficit, right? Because more activity means more fat loss, right? But no one accounts for the fact that the more cardiovascular work you do, the more time you spend putting your body under stress, the hungrier you get, right? Your body gets into this point of, needing energy, needing fuel. And oftentimes your cravings, go through the roof. It's not like your body's like, oh, I want more food, and then you're going to go and have a chicken salad. It's more like, well, I want more calories, and then what do we go for? Pete, you did your half marathon.
I was literally about to say, yeah, like the
Yeah.
training,
How
the
did
three
that
months,
feel?
yeah, the 3 months in the run up to the half marathon. Obviously, my mileage was increasing each week, so I just ran twice a week, right? And I swear, those days where I would run, great, I put in the effort, and
Right.
burnt the calories, but then after I didn't move all day. And so the kind of over expenditure in calories from the run is actually then negated somewhat by just literally being a couch potato all day. And equally, then it's much easier to justify yourself. Ooh, I want the Oreo cake pot from Archie's along with my chicken sandwich. And so your appetite goes through the roof when you are doing these sorts of cardio activities. So if you are already fighting cravings or high appetite and hunger through the day, then doing these sorts of things is going to make you absolutely ravenous. So that's something to bear in mind. As I said here, kind of more cardio equals faster fat loss, but actually, your movement outside of the cardio decreases because your body has just expended all sorts of calories and energy doing the cardio. I earned my food today, as I said, with the Oreo little cake pot. The extra calories, they actually push you to maintenance or even into surplus. Mate, I was actually sort of looking at this. My body fat percentage actually increased when I was prepping for the half marathon because I lost
Yeah.
muscle mass and obviously I got a bit lax with my food. So it's kind of like contrary. And also, if you look at sort of the extreme case of marathon runners, low muscle mass, still got a fair amount of fat on them. And,
Yeah.
it's kind of not necessarily the look that I don't think sort of most people want to go for. And the last one, around, okay, I'm not losing weight. I need to do more cardio. And so all of the above reasons here can actually make it less effective. The body adapts, it becomes more efficient and burns less calories. And therefore, we need to then sort of architect the calorie deficit again. So look at your movement, look at your food you're coming in or you're taking in and the calories that you're consuming rather than thinking, okay, cardio is the answer. And we had it actually the other day with a client, Marvin, with Nolf. And, she had found that she was steadily increasing her weight and she didn't really know what was up and she wanted to introduce cardio. However, we looked back at, say, the last 3 or 4 months, and I think her steps had reduced by like 10, 15, 20% month on month. And so it wasn't the fact that she needed more cardio, it was the fact that she actually, due to work circumstances and all this kind of stuff, she was just gradually moving less month to month. And so obviously, then what was a calorie deficit previously no longer is. So this is why myself and Marvin, we set these targets because when we have these targets in place, it's much easier to then manufacture that calorie deficit for you. and also allow us to tweak a variable when we need to. Because everyone's journey when it comes to fat loss, if you're down 2 kilos, 5 kilos, 10 kilos, 15, whatever it might be, you will get to the point where you plateau, which is perfectly natural. But then we need to be in a position where we can tweak something and then we see the fat loss. That may be reduce a serving of carbohydrate. It may be increase the steps by 1,000. Whatever it is, those are the smart moves that we can make with that. So, Marvin, question time.
Yes, question time. Actually, Esra shared something really funny. She said this reminded her of a doctor who told her that one piece of sambusa wouldn't be burnt even if she walked for 2 continuous hours. And she cried because of the frustration at that time. A bit of a reality check there, Esra. I'm sure that wasn't easy to stomach.
Ignorance is bliss, Marvin.
Yeah, so how long does it take you to burn 500 calories? And maybe the question should actually really be, how long does it take you to consume the 500 calories, right? There's a massive mismatch between those two things. Anyone want to give it a guess at any of those two? Russia's just laughing.
Yeah, I think she knows the comparison, probably.
She knows exactly what's coming, right?
30 minutes cycling.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Rashes in
Anyone
heart
else?
rate zone 5 for the cycling.
Yeah, maybe
Non-stop.
45. Okay, we're getting somewhere.
Okay, let's jump over. So this was actually from one of my runs the other day, right? I moved for 40 minutes and burned 500, or burned supposedly, according to Strava, 563 calories. So 40 minutes burnt that. And that was like at my max pace, right? That was an intense session. Whereas to eat it or drink it, combination of both is, I don't know, I think most people that's probably like 10 seconds when hungry. Wolf it down. So it just goes to show that if you are focusing on trying to outperform or outtrain or outburn the calories consumed, you're never going to be able to do it. Because again, right, I can only do this for 40 minutes a day, not even a day, a few times a week, right? And so to think that, okay, I just need to do 500 calories, that takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and also a lot of like stress on the body. And so if you're doing endless hours of cardio, the amount of stress that can go on the body is actually very counterproductive. And then cortisol is high, and then it's harder to lose fat and sleep and so on. Anything to add there,
And
Marvin, other than that Coke looking quite refreshing?
yeah, yeah. It does look refreshing. I was going to say, this is also assuming that this is correct, right? So remember, we mentioned how these trackers are anywhere from 25 to 90% inaccurate.
True,
If we
true.
were to, yeah, if we were to be generous and say it's 50% inaccurate, so assuming here Pete, burnt what, 270 calories, right? And then he went and smashed 500 calories here, that like there's a massive gap between those two things, right? So if that's someone that's aiming for using cardio for fat loss, but then going and, eating this much calories and saying, oh, I earned it, I did this, you've essentially taken yourself from what you assume was a deficit to a surplus in your total calories, consumed over there.
And then it's no wonder why then it gets frustrating for people when they are putting all of this effort in and they're not necessarily seeing the change, right? Because yeah, quite right, you're putting in the effort, and it's the kind of the lack of knowledge, I guess, that is proving challenging. And just to sort of mention here, right? There's nothing wrong or like bad necessarily about pizza, right? Or any food for that matter. It's just, is it going to help us get to our goal, right? Every one of you here, you'll have a free meal within your plan. You can have a tub of ice cream, you can have a pizza, you can have a burger, whatever it is. Like it's a free meal there because you have kind of you've locked in over the course of the week, and then you have this because we're much more of a lifestyle focused approach, right? We want you going to eat with your friends or your family and not feeling like you're going to be guilty or you shouldn't have this, or this food is bad or unhealthy, everything in moderation. But when you are, locked into a fat loss phase, the amount of times you can have these things or afford to have these things is reduced, right? Unless you are sort of great in the balancing of things out when it comes to your nutrition in a day.
Yeah, Pete, you've already touched briefly on the mistakes. You wanna keep going? Let us.
Yeah, sure. So the mistakes we see, endless hours of cardio over steps or strength training. So people often then swap out the strength training for cardio. Only temporarily uses more energy, right? Because the interesting thing here is like if we are building more muscle as well, then we're going to be expending a higher amount of calories at rest, right? So the BMR, what your body burns when it isn't do anything, is higher, right? So someone with a higher level of muscle mass compared to someone with a lower level of muscle mass, even if they weigh the same, is the guy with the higher or the woman with the higher muscle mass level is going to be expending much more calories at rest. Cardio over strength training is going to actually reduce muscle mass. And also, there's not necessarily a progressive element or structure to that cardio. So the sort of gains of that is going to be questionable as well. There's also the skill component, right? I saw this a lot. I don't know if anyone sort of was aware of, the F1 running track or the F1 track, which then got turned into like a running track over the course of the summer in Jeddah. Horribly hot. But anyway, a lot of people obviously went there because it was a vibe, it was fun, it was cool. They started running, and lo and behold, like the next session or a couple sessions later, they would have knee problems or shin splints or something like that. And so there is a skill to performing certain sort of modalities of cardio. Running is a skill. And especially for people who are looking for fat loss, for example, they obviously weigh above probably what they should. And therefore, the like impact on their feet, on their knees, on their shins can actually do more harm than good. And so this is something that we see quite a lot. People think, running's easy. It's a skill. And it's not just a case of put on your shoes and run outside necessarily, okay? Because there's going to be that skill component. There's going to be a risk of injury or an elevation of risk in injury. We also have, they pair cardio with an extreme calorie deficit and restriction. So constantly tired, underfueled, undernourished, again, risk of injury and burnout, too restrictive, physically and psychologically unstable, hormone dysregulation as well, potentially the loss of period if you're female. If you're male, your testosterone can go through the floor, and then that's not going to be good for muscle mass retention as well. And then finally, again, something we see, and I think it's probably been emphasized as well by the fitness industry, is cardio is punishment, or exercise in general as punishment or means to earn food. And as you've seen, like earning a biscuit or a sambusa is kind of impossible to think of it that way, because it's going to leave you thinking, oh my God, I can't eat anything. I feel guilty. And then it's just, again, going to really like breed that poor relationship between fitness, which is all about like abundance and performance and what you can do. And it's going to change it into like something that is punishment. And you have to do this because you ate this and you're a terrible person and you deserve to, I don't know, spend 4 hours on a treadmill. So we want to avoid that. A lot of you obviously have sort of fed back over the months and over the years around, I love my training. It's my escape now. It's sort of, I look forward to it. And so we want the same with food. We want that same level of understanding and appreciation of food in general. It's not good and bad. There's a time and a place for everything, moderation. And as long as you are appreciating that what you are eating is going to get you closer or further away from your goal, like that's the way we look at it, rather than this is good, this is bad. We don't want that. Food has no moral value, right? Other than what we people put to it, right? So when to use cardio? Over to you, Marvin.
Yeah, so as we've beaten the drum about cardio, maybe just a kind of disclaimer, like we're not anti-cardio. It's not that we hate cardio. It's just we're trying to drive home the point that cardiovascular training should not be your primary method of fat loss, right? It is for building your cardiovascular base, right? It's for building your endurance when you want to increase your gas tank, when you want to be able to recover quicker, when you want to be able maybe to challenge yourself and do set a personal goal of running a 5K or a 10K. I know Fatima recently, she's not on the call, she? No, she's not. Mentioned that she might want to tackle a marathon. And so she's considering, wanting to get some cardio training built into her program, right? So that's a great reason for wanting to do cardio, right? When you potentially want to break that cycle of being in the gym, you want to get outdoors, when you connect with friends, playing paddle, doing walks with other people, like think of cardiovascular training as a way to not only just build endurance and all these things. Also think of it as a fun activity, right? Paddle is becoming much more popular nowadays. Linda, I know, used to love going on the Corniche, getting her nice long walks in, which I think she's even doing now with her baby sometimes. So there's different methods of doing cardio, and there's different ways in which you can be doing your cardiovascular training. It doesn't have to be this hard and fast rule of I only do my cardio in the gym. I only get on the Stairmaster, and beat myself and drenched and sweating. And, like there's so many other things. You can go on hikes, you can join hike clubs and all these things. The world is your oyster, really, essentially, when it comes to cardio. So like for me personally, I enjoyed strength training 2 to 3 times a week and going for walks with my family. And that is essentially my cardiovascular training. Once in a while, I'll hop in and do a boot camp with a couple of friends, or I'll go for a very long hike with a couple of friends. And that's my cardiovascular training. So start to think of cardio as, a fun thing that you can do outside of the gym as well. Pete, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, and I think, that's exactly why, I got into running as well, because, for God knows how many years, like 18 years, I've just been like a gym rat, right? Which is great. But, sometimes you do need to break the cycle a little bit. And that's not to say like I've stopped strength training. I still strength train 4 to 5 times a week. But to be able to add, 2 times where, okay, yes, you have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go run in Jeddah, but like the positiveness or the excitement around it or the atmosphere or the vibe on a Friday morning is amazing, right? And even though the running sucks, and there's a whole nother sort of conversation around building discipline and all this kind of stuff, like the ability to do that just adds to my life. It sort of brings me joy, and it brings me a change of scenery, excitement. It gets me feeling good. And also it's just another like element or goal that I can work towards, right? So now, after I did the half marathon, I want to improve my 5K time. So I'm working on that. And I think, something to mention here is if you are going for an endurance goal or your first 5K or whatever it is, there's the component of like nutrition as well. And in order to be able to perform at your best, you need to be fueled and nourished. Now, if I was preparing or wanting to break a PB when I'm trying to lose fat, like the 2 hour odds, right? You don't have enough carbohydrate coming in, your muscles are depleted of stored energy, and so it makes it so much harder. So like again, like if there is a performance or endurance based goal that you want to get into, then the nutrition approach has to match that to be able to support you most effectively as well. So that's something to bear in mind as well. Marvin, you agree?
Agreed, 100%. Like you think of endurance athletes, triathletes, runners, trail runners, like all these people, how much they have to make sure that their nutrition is on point. They carry gels with them, they have all these high sugar drinks because they need that energy to keep them going whilst they're on their runs and their long endurance races as well.
Nice. So over to the next slide. So how to include it in your plan?
There we
You
go.
want to start with
So
this?
you, yeah, yeah. So you want to start with the role of cardio, not the type. So essentially what we've spoken about, right? You want to acknowledge that there's a skill acquisition component, right? So we spoke about running, for example, and how a lot of people end up with all these injuries. It's not that running is bad. It's just that people haven't acknowledged that there's a way in which you need to progressively start with the running, right? You're not going to go out and Pete didn't just all of a sudden one morning wake up and say, oh, I'm going to Riyadh, I'm going to do the half marathon, right? Like there was some training involved, right? Because if you don't do that, then you're going to have injuries, right? And lo and behold, running now gets this bad rap. You also want to make sure you're building your strength training around it, right? Not instead of it. So you don't want the cardiovascular work to replace your strength training. Unless, of course, and even endurance runners, right? I was going to say, unless, of course, you're an endurance athlete, but endurance athletes still strength train. because strength training in that instance for them is about injury prevention, right? They still want to make sure that their joints are mobile. They still want to make sure that their bones are still strong. Their muscles that they might lose, they still have something, right? And so you still want to consider all these things. An incremental progressive approach, like I said, you're not just going to go out and, put on shoes and start, go for a run. There's a method to the madness, so you can reach out to us if this is something that you eventually start to think, oh, I'd love to actually start running. And so we can start to think about and chat about, how we can progressively approach this and build it into your program rather than, I'm going to go start doing 10K runs and then you all of a sudden get injured and then you struggle. And, we want to make sure that it's done well. You place it intelligently in the week, and we factor in things like recovery, nutrition, and all these things, right? A holistic approach, programming towards your cardiovascular training.
I think sort of Amani just in the group said, for me, I choose incline walk after my strength training. I hope this is right. That's absolutely fine. The one thing I would say is I see way too many people in the gym, and I'm sorry if this is you, but it's better to sort of say it than have you continue. We can't set the incline like this and then hold on to the handles. So Amani, you don't need to tell me if that's what you do, but the incline is there to make it more challenging. And even if you are max incline and holding on, it obviously kind of negates some of that incline. Good, thank you, Amani, because I was about to refund you and tell you to. I'm joking. I'm joking. But yeah, like, because incline, like what that does is it makes the walk more challenging, right? And so it's still something that you can sustain for a longer period of time potentially. And it's not going to be overly stressful to the body. So yeah, that's a really nice sort of way to probably take you from maybe a zone 1 and 2 to maybe a 2 and 3, or at least a high 2. And so, for example, obviously it's going to be different depending on who you are. And this is why, obviously, myself and Marvin, we have the groups with you so we could discuss these sorts of things. But if, for example, you were going to wanted to introduce something once a week, what we would suggest is, more of a zone 2 type movement, which is, 30 to 60 minutes of easy to moderate intensity, right? This is the able to sustain a conversation. If you're wanting to do maybe twice a week or build up to twice a week, then you can look at 2 different intensity types, right? Maybe one session is 30 to 60 minutes at an easy to moderate intensity. So again, able to hold a conversation, be on the phone, have a chat. Session 2 may be something which is a little bit more intense, right? 10 to 20 minutes of like more sort of zone heart rate or heart rate zone 3 or 4, which is going to obviously prove challenging. And this is something where you're probably going to be, it's difficult to sustain a conversation. This is where you're just about able to get 1 or 2 words out at a time. So I think just as like, the smart approach to fat loss to kind of close things off, hopefully there's no surprises here. We bang the drum on this all the time. And, we've got quality nutrition, calorie deficit, minimally processed foods, protein focus, strength training 3 to 4 times a week, daily movement, 6 to 10,000 steps, sleep quality, 7 to 9 hours, same sleep and wake times daily where possible. Obviously, after Ramadan, I hope you are probably getting back into the swing of things. And again, sort of myself and Marvin, we didn't want this to be a sort of talk shit about sort of cardio type session, but it's beneficial. It's absolutely useful, but it's about being clear on why we want to do it and to sort of strip the association with fat loss away from it, right? It's a powerful tool. It's about building the engine. It supports everything else that ultimately drives success. And, for you all who are kind of, busy, maybe family, obviously sort of work and, spend time in the gym, it's a nice way to include something which breaks the routine into your life, whether that is your hiking, paddle, whether it's whatever other sports you enjoy, swimming. All of these things can help build your endurance, but do it in a sort of enjoyable way. So kind of building your heart health in a way that is fun, exciting. You can do with a group of friends, whereas you may not be able to do that with the gym setting. So that is us for today. Does anyone have, well, first of all, Marvin, do you have anything else to add there?
Nothing to add, but Abdul, well, from my side, but Abdullah asked a really good question. He says, what about HIIT, high intensity interval training for once a week, for instance? There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, like as we've said, but we will always want to make sure that this is a part of your whole program, right? And also making sure that you're not overdoing it. So, one tip or one piece of advice we would give for the if you're going to go and do HIIT, for example, I wouldn't all of a sudden go pick up running and just do sprints. And, even though I haven't done sprints for 10 years, maybe you want to go and use an assault bike, for example, right? And do 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off for, I don't know, 5, 6 minutes or whatever the case may be, right? Choose something that has no skill acquisition, because I mean, riding a bike is riding a bike, right? As opposed to running and all the other things that come with that. So be cautious of what you choose as your method of
And
HIIT.
I think with HIIT, because obviously I've been through various different training types over the years. And, again, HIIT is sexy, right? It looks good on Instagram. You're like, yeah, I want to do this workout. But whenever you add something, you always have to take away something else. So you can't just have, say, your hour session, right? Where you're doing, I don't know, your upper body session, you're getting your biceps at the end, your triceps at the end, and then doing HIIT at the end of the session, because I've been there, and like the stress it adds over time, and I'm talking like a week or two, will like crash your energy, especially if you are on a low calorie diet or going for that calorie deficit. So again, it's about knowing why you're doing it, and then knowing that there will be a trade-off, right? So maybe if you've got your hour session, right? Maybe for 40 minutes we do the strength training work, but then the 20 minutes we do something more hit based. So then you may miss out on your biceps and triceps at the end of the session. So something always has to give. And just like, thank you, Rasha. I'm glad you approve. Uh, so so just like anything, it's but I mean, like, you've been there, right, Rasha, where you kind of want to do everything. The hit looks cool, it looks like it's a sexy thing on Instagram, everyone on Instagram is doing it and they look in great shape, so yeah, I'm going to do it. And you just burn yourself out. And just like with the cardio, whether it's the more endurance based type or hit, we want to do stuff that is challenging to us, but we can measure it and we can progress it, right? So just like with your you're staying away. Time and a place for everything. So just like with your strength training, right, where each week you're trying to progressively overload something. You're trying to improve the reps, you're trying to improve the weight. The same is true when it comes to your cardio and your hit, right? Whether that is instead of 30 minutes on a treadmill at a low speed, you may do 32 minutes. And then the following week, you may do 34. Or you may do it at speed 7, and then you do the same time at speed 7.2. All these sorts of things add a progressive element to it, and then gets you to sort of build fitness or build endurance or build efficiency in that way, capacity in that way. Is that fair, Marvin?
It is fair. Russia's gone from loving the hit stuff to there she is doing 40 minutes, more zone two type of cardio over the last, what's it now, 3 months, Russia? So it just goes to show that you can love all the hits, but also know that it's probably not the best thing for you in the context of what you're trying to achieve. And kind of accept that there's certain things that you have to do for what your goals are aligned with.
Exactly. Nice. Any other questions from anyone, or have we smashed the ball out of the park?
I think this is it, right? Hopefully, we don't get called the people that hate cardio. I mean, I would. I'm coming from a CrossFit background, right, and sports as well, right? So cardio is not something that we absolutely hate. But again, just to reiterate, it's about why we use cardio, not for fat loss. We want to use it for cardiovascular health. And so, yeah, really being cautious about how we do it, how we approach it, really important. And use us, of course, to then incorporate it into your program if need be. Otherwise, yeah, do your cardio outside, go play paddle.
Awesome. Well, everyone, if there's no more questions, obviously really appreciate you taking the time to join this evening. We are back with the fortnightly fortnightly group coaching sessions. So again, if there are any questions, any requests, anything, please do shout. As myself and Marvin, we love pulling these together for you, and long may they continue.